As fall is approaching, I decided to leave civilization behind. I packed up and drove deep into the Cascade Mountains for a reading retreat at a remote, off grid cabin with no electricity to stay for a few days. I decided to read only vintage classic horror known as cosmic dread. The stories I chose were by English author Algernon Blackwood, and I picked his two most well known works: The Willows, written in 1907, and The Wendigo, written in 1910. For the next 24 hours, it's me, the wind, this moss topped cabin, and cosmic dread. Weird fiction that blends supernatural horror with nature. Welcome to my ultimate off grid reading experiment. Let's see what happens when the sun goes down. Before we go too much further, I want to give you guys a tour of this moss-topped cabin that I stayed at in the Cascades. So it is very small. It's one bathroom, and the bedroom is sort of part of this whole living space. But it did have a lot of chairs, and the best part about it is the outdoor seating area. I loved how the windows brought in a lot of the natural light, and you could see the trees that had moss dangling from them. Just really lovely atmosphere. Just kind of bring in the sunshine into a house that's sort of dark and nestled in the woods. The bathroom was nice. It had a full walk-in shower, which was also really great. I loved the little decorative touches. I chose Algernon Blackwood as the writer to read for this off grid retreat, mostly because of his nature writing. I love nature writing, and when I was doing research on which author to choose, I kind of bantered about with different pieces of work, but I settled on Algernon Blackwood because he is known as the pioneer of weird fiction, psychological horror, and the subgenre of cosmic dread. So I settled down to read The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood as my first reading choice. As you know, I love to read outside. Since the sun was still at its full afternoon glory, I felt fairly safe sitting there reading this scary story. I just love immersing myself in nature, especially when reading books that are written by nature writers. Just to give you an idea of how beautiful the nature writing is, I'm going to share a few quotes. The wintry sharpness of the air was tempered now by a sun that topped the wooded ridges and blazed with a luxurious warmth upon the world of lake and forest below. I loved his English sense of humor, and as a tea drinker, this line really got me. They enjoyed their well-earned supper, eating untold quantities of fish and drinking unmilked tea strong enough to kill men who had not covered 30 miles of hard going. I completely understand a dark, unmilked tea and the difference there. It also was so very cozy, as evidenced by this paragraph. The two men lay down, without undressing, upon their beds of soft balsam boughs, cunningly arranged. Inside, all was warm and cozy, but outside, the world of crowding trees pressed close about them, marshalling their million shadows and smothering the little tent that stood there like a wee white shell facing the ocean of tremendous forest. And its food, of all the muck in the whole bush, is moss. It's a moss eater, the Wendigo. A moss eater. and I am surrounded by moss. And as I have finished the Wendigo, it is very late at night, and I can fully understand his masterful ability to bring out the psychological vulnerabilities that we have. So, as he is writing about this story in the Wendigo, I could fully relate to the descriptions of the mental processes that humans go through when they are out in the wild. So, in the Wendigo, we have a group of men who are in Canada for a moose hunt. We have a lot of different types of people who are involved in this moose hunt, and we see them kind of separate off. We end up following two characters, and we have a situation where you're not sure if what you're reading is actually happening. And me choosing his stories for the nature writing was spot on. The nature writing is fantastic. There is a critique to this, and I don't think that you can really kind of do a fair analysis of his works without mentioning this part, which is he definitely is a man of his time. So he uses racial slurs that are not acceptable today. In the Wendigo, he used, it was right at the beginning, and I was like, oh no, it was the only time it was used. I really wish that we could have just an edited version where that part is taken out, because I just really think that that does kind of weigh down the work. But realizing he wrote this in over 100 years ago, and that language was unfortunately acceptable at that time. The other thing is the way that he describes indigenous peoples and folklore, as well as the people that are kind of traveling with indigenous people, very much is a limited viewpoint. It's what a lot of people would consider like a colonialism kind of trope and perspective. So we've got like the savior complex, all of that is kind of wrapped into this story. However, I still enjoyed it for what it was, which was this psychological horror where you are out in the woods and you can really see how you start to think that there's a possibility that there are things out there that are unexplainable. And because you're alone, you do also start to think like, did I imagine that? Did that actually happen? Did I actually hear that? All of it. And I know from past experiences as well as this particular reading retreat that going for walks when you're alone, you're definitely kind of looking over your shoulder. You feel like you've heard something. It can kind of be a terrifying experience. My favorite part are Algernon Blackwood's sensory details. You can see, feel, and smell all of the experiences that he is describing. He is so masterful at that part. And in the Wendigo, I think he did a great job with the tension between psychological horror versus actual horror elements. So this is an indigenous folklore story, the Wendigo is, and it actually is sort of this monstrous creature. So he has taken kind of this psychological aspect of not being sure, is this actually real? Is this just people who are on their own just kind of losing it? But as he's describing the details and the sensory elements of it, you do realize that there must be some truth in this. They can't all have been hallucinating. As I sit here, I hear a noise. I saw a coyote outside the window earlier this evening. So now, as I'm sitting out here, I feel like I'm close enough to the door that I could run if I need to. But anyway, I lost my train of thought. But I do think that Algernon Blackwood does a great job of helping us to realize that what actually happened in this story could have happened and that the people that were all there truly believed that it did. So it was a fantastic story. I think I read to you guys about how the Wendigo is a moss eater, and I am surrounded by trees covered in moss. So I was like, oh, that's creepy. And then I showed you earlier too the actual image of the Wendigo on the cover of the book and what's on the house. And so I'm feeling like the Wendigo was a perfect story. Also because I'm right near the Canadian border in the Cascade Mountains. And so it just really did feel like that story was perfectly set for this retreat experience. Now, it is almost midnight, and I am going to start the next story, which is The Willows, mostly because I feel like I'm not ready to sleep. A little creeped out, so I figure I might as well just keep going. And I also am not planning on turning off the lights. Like, I will have at least one light on in the cabin because I am a little on edge. So I'm going to move on to the next story, and then I'm hoping that tomorrow, in the light of the day, I can share with you my thoughts on The Willows. The question is, do I want to stay out here a little bit and read it? Or do I just want to go take a shower, put on my PJs, and read in the safety of the bed with the light on in there? Just as in the Wendigo, in the Willows, we also had a sense of humor and relatability for anyone who has gone camping. As they are setting up their tent, Algernon Blackwood says, "But the experience of a collapsing tent at midnight had taught us many devices, and we made the cozy house as safe as possible, and then set about collecting a store of wood to last till bedtime." The Willows is a quintessential example of cosmic dread, and I think this paragraph does a fantastic job of really kind of showing what cosmic dread encompasses. "All my life," he said, "I have been strangely, vividly conscious of another region, not far removed from our own world in one sense, yet wholly different in kind, where great things go on unceasingly, where immense and terrible personalities hurry by, intent on vast purposes, compared to which earthly affairs, the rise and fall of nations, the destinies of empires, the fate of armies and continents, are all as dust in the balance. Vast purposes, I mean, that deal directly with the soul." The first time I heard that loud bang and then the subsequent bangs, I was not sure what was going on, and it did not help me with my cosmic dread or my experience of reading classic horror in the woods alone. But I did realize that they were green hemlock cones that were dropping from the hemlock trees, and they have a very pointy shape at the end, and it was the sound of it hitting the deck and the car and other things around. So once I realized that, I allowed my imagination to calm back down. The morning light in the moss topped cabin was unmatched. I loved the evening light from the night before, but the morning light, there's just something so cheerful and positive about it that it just really made me feel good about continuing to read. So I made a very simple breakfast and worked on finishing The Willows, which was the second story that I had started the night before. I also carved out a little bit of time to go outside to, again, just admire the outside surroundings of this cabin. It's just so unique and so lovely. And I just really wished that I had been able to carve out longer than 24 hours, maybe at least 48. But alas, I did not have that capability. So I made sure to really soak up the experience and time that I had there. I am celebrating the finishing of the two Algernon stories that I read on this off grid retreat with a midday huckleberry soda with fresh huckleberries added to it. I wish you could smell this. It smells so great. So, let me tell you about The Willows, which was the second story that I read. This one definitely felt more like Cosmic Dread. So, Cosmic Dread is this subgenre of the psychological horror genre of books where we are just really felt to be very small creatures in the vast universe. So, while it is horror, I do think that there is a science fiction element. And so the juxtaposition here of the nature writing and the experience of being out in nature and away from humanity up against this idea of there being other beings in the universe and kind of that intersection of these other beings with humans in a way that felt very like ephemeral and not tangible was fascinating. So definitely more sci-fi than the Wendigo was. Oh my gracious. Huckleberry soda. This is amazing. And then an actual huckleberry mixed in with it. Amazing. So, the dread part of the cosmic dread is this underlying fear and tension that Algernon Blackwood is so masterful at building. And so, he's going through the psychological processes of our main character trying to figure out what's real, what's not, what is something that he has control over versus what, the other beings in the universe have control over. So this felt a little bit more psychological and down in the depths of the brain processes and how all of that works than the Wendigo. I felt like the Wendigo, because we had this sort of monster creature, felt a little bit more like stereotypical psychological horror, whereas The Willows, we've got two men who are on a canoe trip down the Danube. They're in Hungary, and they land on this island, and this storm is lashing about. And he's talking about the banks of the island washing away, and so their space is just getting smaller. And so we have this feeling of claustrophobia, like their world is just getting smaller and smaller. There are things in nature that are moving, so they think that they see them in one spot, and then later on they are kind of different. And then we get into this element of this beyond supernatural, almost like alien life forms. And it is, again, fascinating how Algernon Blackwood combines this raw camping on an island experience with all of its normal camping elements that just is so relatable. But then those types of experiences are then pressed up against this unnatural feeling. And at first, our characters are not really sure what's going on. And just as in the Wendigo, we had two men. One of the men seemed to really know what was going on, and one of the men was just experiencing it. We were experiencing it with him and not really fully understanding or grasping. And the other character always is the one who has something happen to him. And they experience it together, but then you have that sort of like savior trope that ends up happening. I definitely think that the Willows settles into that cosmic dread subgenre much more than the Wendigo does. And we really get the feeling of the smallest of humanity and the vastness of the universe. So it's interesting. I did a little bit of research on cosmic dread when I first decided that I was going to read Algernon Blackwood. And apparently the originator is an author named Lovecraft. And he claims that the Willows story by Algernon Blackwood is like the quintessential, one of the best pieces of literature to fully grasp this concept of cosmic dread that he had read, other than, I guess, what he had written. So I find that fascinating. So if you're at all interested in the psychological horror genre, or maybe you're not, but you do like classics, I think reading an Algernon Blackwood story is definitely manageable. So they're not super long, they're not gory, they're not, your sort of modern horror tales. Instead, they definitely feel from a bygone era. The language is beautiful. The story is well crafted. And I do think that it is very thought-provoking as far as kind of how we feel when we are isolated out in nature and kind of the processes that your mind can kind of move to in moments of fear. And again, it's not a big ask because the stories aren't super long. They are available on Audible. I did start listening to them on Audible, but really felt like because of the language being a little bit older that I would get more out of it if I could actually read it. So I found a Kindle version that has all of his work. So it's like a collection of his works in it. And you can easily, through the table of contents, find the different stories. And I believe it was just a couple dollars. I have credits on Amazon that I save digital credits. And so for me, it was a zero cost. And that way I was able to read it physically. So let me know if you have read any Algernon Blackwood. Let me know if you have done an off-grid reading experience. I enjoyed this so very much. Definitely makes me feel like, number one, that I would love to live in Northern Washington. This is just such a beautiful landscape, but also made me feel like I definitely need to do more solo reading retreats, because even though I was reading kind of creepy stories, it definitely is rejuvenating. The silence is so wonderful to kind of settle in, and just a wonderful experience. So let me know your thoughts on this. Again, let me know if you've read Algernon Blackwood or other psychological horror. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So thanks so much for coming along with me on this off-grid retreat experience. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.